All right, time for another video, right? Like, how long has it been? Wait, 11 days already? So much has happened in the past 11 days. Exorcist is a great example of this with the triple ability.
Happy birthday, Ready Player Will.
The bargaining positions of both Russia and Ukraine have changed.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. I know it's been some time since I've uploaded a video because there's been so many changes in the game, and quite honestly, I was hesitant to do any kind of analysis until I fully understood A, what changed, B, the magnitude of those changes, and C, really deep diving in some of the stats that when I obviously do my character reviews, I can speak more confidently, answer your questions about what I'm seeing, and quite honestly, give a more well-informed analysis, which at the end of the day is always my top priority. So this video is about Truststones and specifically the stat breakdown of the different set builds that you can get and what it means for your characters. There's a bunch of videos already done there between R&J, Dr. Diggs, and handfuls of other great content creators talking about how to do it, the basics of it, so some basic FAQs. There's subreddit posts all about it. I'm not going to get into how to form Truststones, but I'm going to talk through the stats, the strategy, and how to best decide for you which ones are best for you and how you can manage the system. So just getting into things, the overview of what I'm going to do today, I'm going to A, go over how to remember Truststone spots and the letters and the names, because I think the system itself is stupidly confusing. I'm actually going to poke some fun at it, which is something I don't often do, things that Gumi does. The second thing, I'm going to talk about how to think about stats and more specifically base stats. Sit down. This is going to be a video that I'm going to keep as high level as possible, but you absolutely need to understand exactly how the stats generally work to have any idea how to possibly use Truststones in this game. Then we're going to talk about the set bonuses overview, which ones I like and don't like, and then we're going to take a one step deeper dive in some of the ones that are a little harder to really think through, and we're going to talk about the percentage increases for luck in terms of what it does for your evasion rate, what it does for accuracy, what it does for crit evasion, and then we're going to look at dexterity in the kind of the same light on what it does for accuracy versus the actual accuracy option on the Truststones, what it does for crit rate, and then finally a real high level overview of how to decide what Truststones you should use on what TMRs. So first things first, how to remember the Truststones, because there's obviously a lot of jargon thrown around in the letters and the acronyms and whatnot. The stones are I, which, okay, I can see that as an I. J, listen here, Gumi, that is not a J. I don't know who you think you are. That's an L. I don't know in what world that is possibly a J. We have P. I guess it's kind of like a P. Looks like almost that could be the J instead. We had A. All right, that one I can live with. T. Yeah, okay, not bad. And then that's not a G. That's a scribble, Gumi. That is, I'm so flabbergasted that they chose the font that they did for these, because like three out of the six of them don't even look like the letters they're supposed to represent. And then the other thing that drives me absolutely nuts is that because they want to make you think of them as set bonuses, like left side and right side, offense and defense, you know, it's really supposed to think of like these three, and you're supposed to think like these three, but that's not how Gumi does it in game. When you sort through the menu, they're listed in this like weird zigzag order. It's like I, then A, then J, then T, then like it's weird. I don't know why they do. And when you go to unlock it, you have to unlock left to right down. Like it's just so odd considering that they're grouped up left side and right side, and it's somehow not sorted. Like shame on you, Gumi, to make it way more complex than it needs to be. But I have an acronym that I'm personally using to help remember it. And the way I want to think of this is I just played at the game. Just remember that phrase. I just played at the game. I just played at the game. And that's an easy way for me to remember the letters without having to like look at what they look like or trying to read them live, because that J looks like an L and that G looks like a scribble. I just played at the game. Just memorize it, mnemonic device. Really easy way to remember the left side and the right side and the order of the letters. I promise you, should hopefully clear things up. Now, we're going to talk about how the stat percentages apply, because stats are obviously a very complex thing in the game. They really don't explain any of the math in game. You have to rely on us and some data mining and a whole bunch of crap in order to do it. But essentially the way stats work, and if you look at a character screen and you look at their total stats, there's always the base stats of the characters. And I'm going to go through a deep dive on this in a second. This is the most important thing you're going to need to understand in the game going forward, because you have a character's base stats, but then you have their board stats on their ability board, things that you unlock there, and including the node upgrades and whatnot. Then there's their mastery abilities that are unique to each character. Their character quests, when you get to level 40, you'll unlock those mastery abilities. You also have passive abilities, which obviously affect their stats. You also have the stats from your equipment that you put on them. You have the stats that come from an Esper on the Esper nodes and the actual inherent stats of the Esper itself. You also have vision card stats, and again, it's the kind of same thing as Espers. Each vision card has its own like set stat, and then it's got like a percentage boost stat for some things. We'll talk about that in a second. There's affinity stats for level unit affinity, so like levels 1 to 5 will give you boosts to luck, dexterity, and agility at varying amounts depending upon how close you are to one or two of your teammates. And then there's self and teammate buffs, which obviously affect the stats, and we're going to talk about how some of that applies. And finally, we now have the Truststone stats as well, so that when you apply all of these together and you hold down on your character screen and bring up that character, this is the accumulation of all that. And there's different kinds of ways that these stats get applied. So some of them are flat stat buffs. Like think of your weapon. If you equip a weapon on someone and it says attack 40, that's a flat attack that it literally just takes all these numbers and it just adds 40. The second one you want to think of is percentage increases to attributes. And let me just clarify what exactly this means. I specifically listed the four on the right because evasion, accuracy, crit rate, and crit avoidance are things you commonly see, but they're not one of the base stats that come with a character. Characters' base stats are their HP, TP, AP, attack, magic, dexterity, luck, agility. I think that's basically it. But though these attributes are not part of your base stats, they're actually a output of a result of equation to get total evasion and total accuracy. And we'll talk more about that soon too. But an example of that is if you wear a piece of equipment that has something like evasion plus 29%. Evasion is not a base stat. Evasion is an attribute that gets spit out because of a bunch of base stat combinations. And then there's percentage buffs to base stat, and a lot of people don't always realize this, but if you think of something like Ramu, the vision card, that's 50% magic buff, that doesn't mean take total magic and increase it by 50%. It only looks at the base stats of the character. And the Truststones are all going to be the same thing here, where if you see percentage buffs to stats, it's always scaling off the base stat of the character, which is why you want to get more fundamentally familiar with them. Now, this is going to be a whole tutorial on how to find base stats, and specifically how to read the WOTV calc character pages. So WOTV-calc.com is an absolute must-have tool for anybody playing this game. It stinks that it exists, but quite honestly, there's a lot of gacha games that obviously rely on third-party and content creators to make things like this, and I'll really and truly thank everything for Bismarck for making this, because if this website didn't exist, quite frankly, I wouldn't play the game. This is a necessity. But for those of you that are familiar with this, we'll go to a character page here like Celeste, and if you go to her stat page here, there's a lot going on here, and you really got to understand what it means. And just going through generally what this page is meant to be, there's these unit stats at the top that kind of break out their minimum and maximum and their max at EX. There's then this board stats area, which is technically, if you look at their skill tree, this is technically their board. So the stats that we saw on the prior page are basically the accumulation of these nodes from the ability board. They technically have this other section, which this is actually one of the nodes on the board. So there's a magic 20%. If you went to the skill tree, you'll actually see here there's a stat here, increased magic 20%. That's where that comes from. There's then the board stats on the EX side of things. There's then the job stats that are broken down by each one of the jobs that the character has and the EX upgrades from that. And then finally on their actual character page here, their mastery ability, which is one of those things you can unlock at that level 40 quest when you go into the character request. These obviously affect their stats as well. And so theoretically at the bottom here, there's this area called total stats. And it's true, this is their total stats at max level and max job. But that's not their base stats. That's just their total stats. And I don't think there's an easy way to break out base stats, but little secret, that actually is something I'm working on. I have an offline spreadsheet that I use for all my stat analyses, and I do have ambitions to put it up in the next week or two so that everyone can finally see base stats and equations and things of that nature on their own without having to rely on me or the content creators doing the math for you. It's obviously a very complex thing to potentially build out. It's something that I have to maintain online, and quite honestly, the online configuration kind of stinks compared to the desktop version. And then obviously it's difficult because everyone's going to always want to see things in different ways, so I have to accommodate changes and whatnot. But when we talk about finding a character's base stats, and I only really think about them at max level 120. Because if you don't, there's just it gets way too messy. It's messy as it is. Just think of them at their max. Their character's base stats is this line right here. EX, unit stats, plus this bottom line, total plus EX. That's their job stats. Those two lines, when you add them together, are a character's base stats. So this magic 20% that you see here, that's part of the node, is not a character's base stat. This HP that they get from the board is not their base stat. It's a board stat. It's a very critical thing that you have to understand, particularly when you're thinking about Truststones and obviously the vision cards as well, because the same thing applies when you see a percentage buff. It's always scaling off their base stats. Now, getting back to the presentation side here, the set bonuses, the way that the Truststones work in essence are when you fill up 3 slots on one side of the same type of attribute, it will give you a set bonus, is the term, and you have a defensive side and you have an offensive side. And looking at the defense side of things, again, I just played. The things you can potentially upgrade are increase HP 5% and all elemental resistance 5%. I genuinely really like this. I think this is a great one to pick for any TMR that goes on your tanks very often. The second one here, increase TP for 10%. That's not, I don't really care about that. That's really not going to come in handy for a lot of people. But the acquired AP 25% definitely could, where obviously you'll get more AP naturally. And that will stack with other external sources of acquired AP. Third one is the increased defense of 3 and increased healing power of 10. Honestly, this one's kind of fair. I don't think 3 defense matters at all. The healing power 10 is definitely niche, and the same can be said for this next one. I don't think spirit or healing power really does much to impact the game. So out of everything so far, I think these two are definitely in the bottom of the priority list. Now, luck 15%. Luck affects evasion, accuracy, and critical avoidance rate. We're going to get into more of that soon. But you can increase your luck by 15%. You can increase your evasion rate by a flat 15%. So again, evasion rate is like an attribute that combines luck, agility, and external sources of evasion. And then finally, there's increased critical evasion. And part of that equation is essentially you have a character's critical rate minus a character's critical avoidance rate, and that's the percentage chance that you'll land a critical hit. That's essentially how that works. Now on the offensive side, at the game, I just played at the game. You can go increase AP 10% and decrease AP consumption by 10%. I actually genuinely like this one a lot. You actually might tangibly affect how much starting AP someone starts out with, and obviously the decrease of AP consumption might allow them to spam more abilities. The increased attack of 10% and defense penetration of 10 is definitely nice, particularly for characters that don't have a lot of innate defense penetration. Conversely, the magic, the same idea here, magic 10%. It's really the spirit penetration that matters a lot, though. Attack and magic with 10% is relatively minor overall, because again, it's only off the base stats here. You can increase dexterity by 35%. Now, dexterity affects your accuracy and your critical hit rate. And then, or you can conversely do increase accuracy 15%, just straight up 15% accuracy. And then the last two here, you have increased critical rate of 15, and it increases your critical damage, which is an extra part of the modifier in the damage equation. And then finally, there's an agility build, and I believe that's only available on the UR and MR Truststones, that you can increase agility by 3, but more importantly, to synergize with kind of what that does is increase evasion rate by 5. So that's the set bonuses in a nutshell. There's a lot of really good ones here. There's ones that I think are a little overrated, and there's some that are kind of like a nice blend of making a character well-rounded. Now we're going to dive more specifically into luck and dexterity, and just speaking generally about how they affect the accuracy side of things, because this is a question that everyone always has. It's one that's not easily explained in the game, and given the meta that we see, it's one that really needs to be understood more thoroughly so that people don't get as frustrated when they see evasion Elena. Now we have evasion Locke. Obviously Dark and Earth have a bunch of evasion. And you don't need to understand these equations mathematically. You just need to understand kind of conceptually how it works over a range of time, and I'm going to break that all down really simply, really graphically here for you. So evasion takes your agility, your luck, and any kind of evasion attribute, so like 15% evasion. The accuracy takes into account dexterity, luck, and accuracy. Just that's all you have to remember. Those are things that I already talked about here, so there should be no surprises per se. Now, dexterity, because of the way this mathematical formula works in the first half of things, dexterity has essentially what I call diminishing returns over time. And what that means is what you're looking at the bottom here on this x-axis is just the number of dexterity your character has. And so early on, like up until like 200 or 220 dexterity here, you get a lot of accuracy really quickly. But then once you start hitting this 240 point, you're going to, and on the left side here is your accuracy rate, let's say starting accuracy rate, you start to get less and less accuracy over time based upon how much dexterity you add. You essentially get diminishing returns. So I think it worked out to like every 10 dexterity you add, it's only like 1% extra accuracy once you get past this 400 point. So all you have to really keep in mind is if you have a character that's at 400 dexterity already, they're just going to have diminishing returns the more and more dexterity you put on them. Not a bad thing, it's just not a huge return. Conversely, the luck portion of things here, that if you look at the luck part of the equation, if you were to graph that, essentially the luck doesn't really contribute to accuracy up until you get to around 240 luck. And then after that, the luck, you'll notice the line doesn't have that the same diminishing return. So after around 240 luck, luck tends to be the main driver of your extra accuracy. And if you were to put them both together, the graph actually looks something like this, where obviously it kind of ramps up here in the beginning, but then it's pretty much constant after that because of how the luck ends up being constant as you go along. And the final thing you just really need to understand as a takeaway is just really kind of understanding the slopes of the lines and not getting too deep on this. Essentially, the slope of the dexterity line, like I said, kind of bottoms out, so it's a little more flat, but luck goes way, way higher. And the TLDR, the too long didn't read of all of that, is that for characters that have 400 plus dexterity, you really want to start adding luck to them rather than dexterity if you're trying to maximize their accuracy. It's just more economical. And that'll hopefully help you understand some of the next few things here. So we're going to quantify the stats here. We're going to increase evasion through the luck 15%. Remember the ability set that we were just talking about a couple slides ago. You can either get luck 15% or evasion 15%. How much is luck 15%? It's hard to really tell because obviously you're not going to do the math on this giant evasion formula here every single time you want to do it. So when you're comparing luck 15% versus evasion rate of 15, I've already done the math for you. 15% luck is roughly 9 to 11% evasion, which means if you're trying to max your evasion rate, it's actually better to increase your evasion rate by 15 because 15 is obviously higher than 9 or 11. But don't forget, luck does more than just evasion. We're going to talk about the summary of this in a second here. Now let's think about accuracy here. Remember, luck is part of that equation. What gives you more accuracy? 15% luck or the accuracy of 15? Now this is the offensive side of the board. On the right side, the ATG side. Which one gives you more accuracy? Well, 15% luck is roughly 9 to 11% accuracy. And that actually should kind of make sense for anyone who's real math whizzes here. Because if we go way back to the equation, both the evasion and the accuracy formula, if you look at this luck section, the luck equation is the same in both evasion and accuracy formulas. So it makes sense here that 15% luck gives you essentially both 9 to 11% evasion and 9 to 11% accuracy. So here, if you're trying to really maximize your accuracy, it's better to give 15 accuracy as opposed to the 9 to 11. Now, obviously, it's a question of how material is that extra 4 to 6% accuracy. May not mean that much, but we're going to keep going here, I promise. This is going to make sense in a second. Luck also gives you critical avoidance, meaning less chance to get critically hit by your opponents. Now, which one gives you more, 15% luck or the 25 critical evasion? Again, these are comparing the different set bonuses you can get. Well, 15% is roughly only 5 to 6% critical avoidance. So if you're trying to really prioritize critical avoidance rate, definitely go for the critical evade of 25. 25 is way higher than 5 to 6%. And so the summary of that, if you go luck 15%, it will give you 9 to 11% evasion and 9 to 11% accuracy and 5 to 6% critical avoidance. There's a lot built into that 15% luck stat. So you can either go that way or you can pick them individually. It's really just a question on whether you want to take the, dare I say, more well-rounded amount of stats or whether you want to try to really maximize one of these specific attributes. And we're going to do the same thing for the dexterity here. So what increases accuracy more? 35% dexterity, and this is on the right side of the board. This is the ATG side. You can increase dexterity by 35%. Or, same thing as we saw on 2 slides ago, you can increase accuracy of 15. Which one gives you more? Well, 35% dexterity is roughly only 8 to 9% accuracy. So if you're really trying to max the accuracy, you might want to go for the 15 as opposed to the 8 to 9. But recall there's more that dexterity does than just the accuracy. There's also critical hit rate. Now you want to ask yourself, what does 35% dexterity look like versus 15% crit rate? And the answer is kind of surprising. 35% dexterity is roughly an extra 16 or 17% crit rate. So technically, the dexterity will give you a higher crit rate than the crit rate one does. But that's why they also give you 10 critical damage here. That although dexterity might give you 1 to 2% extra chance to do it, which it's basically the same, the crit rate run will also give you the 10 crit damage, which is kind of the trade-off. Obviously, they're kind of equal, but crit rate gives you that little bit of an advantage of doing the extra damage. So the overview, 35% dexterity will give you 8 to 9% accuracy and 16 to 17% crit hit rate. Or you could pick them individually if you wanted the 15% accuracy or the crit rate and the crit damage. And obviously you can combine both of these, because remember, luck is one side and dexterity is the other side. So theoretically, you could do the 15% luck and the 35% dexterity, or you can mix and match. It's really unique to the character themselves and the matchup you're seeing. So you can mix and match, and that's where we're going to get to the final part here about which trust wounds are best. So how to strategize? Essentially, A, you want to pick your most commonly used TMRs first off, because it requires a handful of books to unlock all 6 nodes. So you really want to prioritize, which TMRs you use the most. And then second to that, you want to think about which characters do you put that TMR on the most, because that is going to determine everything. You need to know which character is going to use which TMR the most and which stats you're going to need for that character. And then more specifically too, you'll want to consider like who they're normally attacking, what you have to build them for the meta. And that's as good as I can tell you. Any other content creator that tells you build this with these stats or build this with these stats, they may not be technically incorrect, but there is definitely no one best build for anything. It is 100% subjective on what the TMR is, who you're putting it on, and who you're fighting against. Completely subjective, because again, if you're looking at the set bonuses here, and let's say something like Zizabel's, that's obviously the one everyone tries to do first because you use it for a lot of different things. Well, if you put Zizabel's on Elena, you're going to want a vastly different set of trust runes than if you put Zizabel's on Cloud, let's say. Where Elena, you're probably going to want the luck or the evasion rate. But Cloud doesn't really need luck or evasion rate because he's already got a bunch of guaranteed hit and he's not an evade unit. You might opt for the crit evasion or the HP or the acquired AP instead. So obviously, 2 different characters, 2 completely different sets of trust stones, despite the fact that they're both using Zizabel's potentially. And the same thing obviously for the offensive side here, where if you're putting on Elena, you might opt for this extra evasion rate and the agility. But on Cloud, you might want the crit rate and the crit damage, because he's obviously a very high critical hit rate character. Same TMR, completely different builds, because it's completely different characters. So I know that might be kind of a letdown for some, but that's why I wanted to go through this whole presentation about what certain percentages are, how they translate, because when you look at certain characters and you're maybe trying to do some mental math here, you're going to have to pick your trust stones based upon who the character is and who you anticipate them facing. That's everything in a nutshell, though. I know this is very dense, but hopefully this was thought-provoking. I hope you understood it. Always happy to take questions because I know it's a very complex thing. Definitely look forward to the Excel spreadsheet too, because that's something that I really want to do that I think a lot of people are going to get value out of. It's just going to be a beast to try to build out and make work on a large scale, just given all the different kinds of inputs. But thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for your patience. I'm so looking forward to doing all the analysis on the Final Fantasy VI collaboration. Should have that coming in the next day or two to finally do the character reviews and the vision card analyses and just everything that's changed in the game. I'm super excited to talk about it with you all. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon.